Right then, this is going to be my first video for KJF Audio. I get asked quite a few things along the way. Can I do videos about this? Can I do instructions about that? So I decided that now's about time to start doing it. The first thing I'm going to show you how to do is to make the cable kit, which you will find on our website. Speaker cable kit, you can get it in any lengths that you want. Select anything from 1 meter up to 10 meters, which hopefully should be enough that, you know, for anything that you want. If you want any longer than that, give me a ring. When you buy a kit, you will be supplied with all of the parts that you need to actually physically make the kit, namely speaker cable. Hope that's reasonably obvious. The speaker cable that we use is the van-damme tour grade cable. It's very flexible, you go around corners, it's very, very strong, you'll never break it, and it comes in various different sizes. The one that we mainly sell on the website is the 2.5mm, but we also have the 1.5mm available on there, and we can supply any of the sizes that you want. This is 2-core. Obviously the van-damme do up to 16 cores, and we can supply that as well if you want, although we don't have those on the website, so we'd do that more as a bespoke thing. So that's the cable. This is a 3 meter length, by the way. Connectors. The connectors that we sell are these CMC connectors. They're what are really known as Z-plug connectors. We'll get a close-up of these in a minute. They are copper, especially in Neil says that they're hard. It's called hard copper. I'm not a chemist, so I don't really know what that is. But essentially it means that you get a good conductor, but it's also strong enough to stay in the back of your speakers. What's good about Z-plugs is that they've got a slit all the way down, so they're expanded as a circle all the way down the whole length, and when you put it in, the entire thing is squashed to go into the back of your connector, so you get a large contact patch over the entire thing, and you won't pull them back out again. They're essentially just minimalist. Cable obviously goes in, get some solder in there, and then use the shrink wrap which comes in the kit. Shrink wrap's colour coded. There's red and blue. Hopefully that's reasonably obvious, but for those that you don't know, generally red is positive, generally negative is blue. So there you go. When we get the ends off of these cable sheaths in a moment, you'll see they're red and blue. There's also grey, where the two cables come out of the end of the sheath once we've cut off some of the sheathing. Looks a bit scruffy, so this just goes over there and shrinks. You'll see it's got the KJF Audio logo on it, so your speakers will look very nice, and your speaker cables rather will look nice and professional. You will need to supply some things as well. Just move those to the side a moment. You are going to need a soldering iron. I've just got a cheap Antex one here, which you can get from Maplin's or similar outlets, eBay for next to nothing, 10-15 pounds. That is all you need really. If you've got a Bosch one, obviously that's much better if you can control heat. That's wonderful, but that will do you. You're going to need something to shrink the heat, the shrink wrap with. Now I use one of these decorating heat guns. That's brilliant. So you get a nice directed beam of very hot air coming out. These are the kind of things that you use to strip paint off of your banisters. I've tried stripping paint off my banisters before, and it's an arduous task which takes hours and hours and hours, so I now don't do that. I use my heat gun just for heat shrink. So you're going to need one of those. You are going to need some sort of snips. I've got a pair of just bull-nose pliers here just to demonstrate that you can use any old thing. That'll do. I normally use a nice pair of snips, side cutters, but they will do. And you'll need some solder, obviously. When you put these Z-plugs on the end of the cable, we're after a very, very close contact. We're after using a small amount of solder as possible, really. Solder is obviously, fairly deleterious to the signal. You can use posh solder if you want. I find posh solder, it takes an age to heat up, and you never end up with a very good joint with that stuff. So just some normal leaded solder, if you can still get hold of it. The cord-roicing type is perfect for this sort of job. It's easier to use the thicker stuff when you're working with speaker cables, otherwise you'll end up using a great big long bit of it to make sure you've got enough tinned end. I'm just going to plug in this soldering iron so it gets warm while I show you everything else. You're also going to need a sharp knife. Now, I'm using a Stanley blade here. You can use your pen knife or your craft knife or your scalpel or whatever sort of blade you would prefer. However, do be careful. I'm not some sort of blade guru that can show you how to not cut yourself. You've just got to use your common sense and make sure you don't chop your fingers off. Hopefully that's reasonably obvious, but just covering my back there, not down to me if you do chop your fingers off. I'm using my blade on my piece of cable. You're using your blade on your piece of cable, and that's your problem. Okay. So, first things first, you are going to need to decide how much of the sheathing to cut off to expose the coloured cores inside. Now, partly that's going to be dictated by how far your banana plugs are apart on the back of your speakers. If they're miles apart, then obviously you're going to need a good long length. If they're not very far apart, then maybe 3-4 inches will probably do. I normally go for somewhere in between, let's say 6 inches. 6 inches is about from fingertip to thumb generally. Take your knife, expose only as much of the blade as you need to. It's about that much. And put your thumb and your forefinger against the cable and roll the cable. Do this a bit at a time. Don't push the cable too hard against the blade. Firstly, because if it slips, your thumb's going to go against the blade and you're going to get a cut in your thumb. And secondly, we don't want to go all the way down to the copper. In fact, we don't even really want to get down to the inside cores. We just want to create a score mark all the way around. And once we've got that score mark all the way around, retract your blade. If you just bend the cable like that, you'll see it starts to split at your line. Sometimes you might need to do an extra little line like that. Just to cut it open nicely. Now you can get cable sheath cutters for this, but of course you're just making one set of cables, so that would probably be a bit ridiculous for you to do that. Now you'll see that I've got no cuts in there, so we're not exposing the copper, so we won't get any shorts. Slide that off there like that. There you go. Just there's some powder inside the cable. That's partly what makes it so flexible. Just clear that off. You'll want to get the other end of the cable, and you'll want to cut that in the same place. So just use the sheath that you took off of there. Measure round. Cut. Okay, and retract the blade. Do the same thing, take that off, set those aside out of the way. Now, I mentioned earlier about the heat gun. You don't necessarily need to use a heat gun. In fact, let me show you two ways of doing it. So, plug that in, get the heat gun. Get one of the grey pieces, slide your two cores through and down to the joint. Now, these are the other way. These are long enough to go half over the sheath of the cable and half over the cores. Take your gun. You probably won't be able to hear me talk while I've got this on because they're quite noisy. I'll try and hold it away from the microphone. Now move your fingers out of the way, you obviously don't want to burn your fingers. And just shrink that down as much as it goes. Now, that has made a nice, neat finish on there with our name, KJF Audio. So that's very nice, and that's made a much, much better finish of the end of that cable there. Now I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. Make sure you've got them around the same way. They're not directional, of course, the bits of shrink wrap. You can put those on whichever way you want. It won't make any difference. Nor is the cable. The cable's not directional either. Now I know some cables are apparently directional, but these ones definitely are not. You can put these on whichever way you want. Take your soldering iron, just rub it over the shrink wrap like so. Now you're going to need a reasonably clean iron to do this with, but it does work. So I've half done that, so that's one way that you can do it. Now that's not so neat doing it with the iron. Another way you can do, if you're a smoker or if you're a good Boy Scout like me and you carry a lighter around with you, good long flame, hold it away a little bit and just go over and shrink that onto there like that. The best method by far is the heat gun method, so if you do have one of those, do use the heat gun. You'll end up with a much better finish, but this suffices. There we are. Of course that's going to be a little warm to the touch to start off with, but not for too long. Right, that's those on the end of there. The next thing that we need to do is strip off enough of the inner sheaths for our Z plugs. Now you'll see on the Z plugs there's maybe 25mm of actual Z plug and then maybe 12mm of the parts to put your copper into. There's a little hole in the middle where you can get your soldering iron tip through and the solder. So you need to cut off about 12mm of the end of your cable sheath. Again, take a sharp knife, just expose as much as is needed. And cut round. Again, be careful that you don't cut your thumb off or slice your thumb open. Especially those older audiophiles among us who might be on warfarin. We don't want your thinned blood all over your wife's coffee table. Or your husband's coffee table, in fact, if you're a female audiophile. We don't have that many female audiophiles. It would certainly be nice to see more. There we go. They're pulled off the end. Now, light twist. You'll see that the copper's already twisted ever so slightly. It's a multi-strand copper. Twist it very slightly. They'll need to be tinned. So by tinning I mean getting some solder on the end of there. Now, I would normally do this with a helping hands type thing that would hold the piece of cable, but I would just want to show that it's possible without any of that paraphernalia really. So I'm going to take my cheap nasty soldering iron and I'm going to take my cheap nasty solder. I've got these cables propped up just on the Stanley knife that I was using. We will need to just heat the copper up a little bit. Now Stanley irons obviously always need tinning, so I tinned this before we started, but you're always just going to make sure that you've got some tin on there. Either use a wet sponge or one of these metal type scouring pads. You dip it in there, it just takes off the excess, so we haven't got solder dripping everywhere. Be careful not to burn yourself with your soldering iron as well. Again, I'm not taking any responsibility. So just bring the soldering iron to the copper as the copper starts to warm up. So you'll get a blob on there, and that'll make a bridge to the copper, which will heat the copper up enough that you can just stroke it up there, up the tin, up the copper. It'll just soak in. So it's not really making a large amount on the outside. It's sort of soaking into the copper, making it a more of an homogeneous thing. You don't need to slide these on first, because you will find that they will go all the way through. So we can do whatever we want. We can put those on first, put them on after. Can't get it back out again now, having said that they go all the way through. There we go. Right. Put those down on the side. Move the things out of the way. Put that through there again. We'll have a close-up of this. Put that through there so it just goes up to the point of the notch just there. So the sheath should essentially be all the way in to the shoulder of the connector. Take your cheap nasty soldering iron again. Put the said cheap nasty soldering iron into the hole on the cable. Now, ideally what we want to do is bridge between the cable itself and the connector. That way we're warming the connector up and we're warming the cable up, because we don't just want solder on the cable and or the connector, we want it on both of them. We want them to make a joint. So if you've got a really good soldering iron, hopefully you can get in there quick, get it up to sort of 700 degrees, get in there, get everything heated up quick and get back out again. I've got to take a little longer with this cheap and nasty soldering iron, but it'll be fine. And just a bit at a time, fill in that hole. There we go. Cool that down so we can handle it. That's obviously very hot, but that's not coming back off. We'll do the same with the other one. Again up to the shoulder. Cheap nasty soldering iron. Bridging both again. Give it a couple of minutes. You should be able to see the solder on the end of the copper softening. Put that in there a bit at a time. You can see it flowing into the connector itself. That'll do. Right. Take one red piece of shrink wrap. Don't do this immediately because that's obviously hot. So you want to cool it down. Don't put that on until it is cool enough that you can at least handle it, otherwise it will make that shrink. Slide it over so that the edge comes up to where the Z plug actually starts, where you can't see the solder. So I like to have mine so that when they're in, the Z plug bit's facing upwards and my logo is facing towards me. Heat gun again. Shrink that round onto there, and that makes a lovely, neat connection. We'll do the same with the blue one. Again, you want to make sure it's round the same way. Neatness. Slide that down to the edge of the where the Z plug becomes the sort of connector part of the plug. Heat gun again. You want to shrink these down as much as possible, so even when they look like they're completely tight to your cable, the shrink wrap will have a bit more shrinkage in it. Just shrink those down and then it just acts as a bit of a strain relief. Okay, so I fast forwarded a little bit and done both ends, so we've got a finished pair of cables now. Professional looking as well at that. Nice ends, nice joins. I've fast forwarded a little bit more undone. It's twin as well, so we've now got 2 pairs of speaker cables. Those speaker cables are going to be as good as anything that you're buying for, you know, multiple hundreds of pounds. At the end of the day, you know, a speaker cable is kind of a speaker cable. The only difference between these speaker cables and the multi-hundred or even £1,000 speaker cables is, you know, sprinkling of fairy dust, really. We know as much about cables as we need to. We know about their inductance, we know about their resistance, we know about their capacitance, we know about the dielectrics that we use and hence any skin effects. We know about you know, the crystalline structures of copper. And they are all the major things. And in fact, some of those things are only very small things, you know, in the character of a cable. Anything else is stuff that we don't really, you know, need to know about or indeed know much about. And certainly those makers of you know, multi-hundred and multi-thousand-pound cables don't know anything about making speaker cable that van-damme don't know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we can change the character of a cable a little, but what we can't do is make a cable that's, you know, hundreds of times better or hundreds of times worse by changing a few things about it and sprinkling pixie dust on it. So these cables really are as good as you need your cable to be. Now you might want a slightly different flavour of cable, but don't be paying thousands of pounds. Just make it with some air cable instead of the van-damme cable or one of the other cables out of the van-damme range. Don't go spending ridiculous amounts of money on cable. It's just not worth it. Buy new records instead, or speaker kits. Anyway, so there we go. I am going to be doing lots and lots of other videos over the coming months. Some of those with Mark Fenlon, some of those with Dr. Scott Lindgren. Some of those are going to be videos like these, but with speaker kits, you know, how to put them together. And then some other things that I've got for sale on my website to show you how they work. If there's anything that you'd like to see, incidentally, just leave that in the comments. As I say, we're going to ask Dr. Scott lots of questions. We're going to ask Mark Fenlon lots of questions. And that can be anything that you want, really. So for Mark, for example, you know, obviously he's the driver designer, so any questions that you've got about wideband driver design that you've always wanted answering, ask. Put something in the comments below, email me at the website, go onto one of the forums where I hang out, contact me like that. I'll pose you know, a dozen or so questions to Mark. We'll sit down in front of the camera and we go through those questions one by one, and I'll release them week by week. So hopefully we'll get some good solid information out there, which will, you know, last for eternity on YouTube, because of course YouTube's going to last for eternity. So slightly tongue-in-cheek. Dr. Scott, we do the same with Dr. Scott as well. Dr. Scott hates being in front of the camera. He hates being called Dr. Scott. So Scott, please ask Scott all the questions you can, so that we can keep him on camera for as long as possible, because he'll enjoy that. And me, if you want to know anything about you know, speaker kits, you know, do drop us a line. I'll answer all of those questions, you know, as much as I can. So the way that you're going to find out when we've answered some of those questions for you is by subscribing. So click the subscribe link. I don't know where, is that here or there somewhere. Click it, and hopefully that will subscribe you to my channel, and I can be one of those internet millionaires. That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? I could retire from speaker building, just do speaker videos. Only joking. Yes, click, sorry, I've lost my thread there. Click on the subscribe button, and then you'll get an email from YouTube when I post another video telling you that I have posted another video, and to pop along and see it, and hopefully you'll find that it's one of the questions you wanted answering being answered. Thank you very much for your time. Bye bye.